So, Andy Burnham has finally broken his silence, and let me tell you, it's about as explosive as a polite British statement can be. 5 hours. That's how long it took for the Mayor of Greater Manchester to respond after Keir Starmer personally orchestrated his political assassination in what can only be described as a 45-minute kangaroo court masquerading as a democratic process. 5 hours of silence that spoke louder than any manifesto, whilst Westminster held its collective breath, wondering what the man Starmer fears most would say. And when he finally spoke, well, it was less fire and brimstone, more passive-aggressive British restraint that somehow cuts deeper than any screaming match ever could. Quick favour, if you're finding this absolutely fascinating, smash that subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Over 94% of you watching haven't subscribed yet. It's completely free, takes literally 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep bringing you this sort of delicious Westminster drama. Cheers if you did. Right, let's dive into this political bloodbath. Now, let's set the scene properly, shall we? Yesterday, Labour's National Executive Committee, that charming little collection of Starmer loyalists, held an emergency meeting. Emergency, as if the fate of British democracy hung in the balance, as if we were facing some existential crisis requiring immediate intervention. But no, the emergency was actually just Keir Starmer panicking because someone more popular, more competent, and significantly less robotic might actually get elected to Parliament. The horror, the absolute horror. And so, in a meeting that lasted just under 45 minutes, these guardians of Labour values voted 8-1 against allowing Andy Burnham to even apply to be the candidate for Gorton and Denton. Not voted against him being the candidate, mind you, voted against him being allowed to apply. Let that sink in for a moment. They wouldn't even let him compete. And where was our beloved Prime Minister during all this? Oh, he was right there in the thick of it, leading from the front, as his supporters are so keen to tell us. Keir Starmer personally led the charge to block his most credible rival from returning to Westminster. He spoke first, he voted against, he set the tone. This wasn't some administrative decision made by faceless bureaucrats. This was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom actively preventing a popular, successful politician from his own party from standing for election. Democracy in action, ladies and gentlemen, makes you proud to be British, doesn't it? The official excuse? Oh, it's absolutely brilliant. They're concerned about the cost of holding a by-election for the mayoral Manchester position if Burnham were to win the parliamentary seat. Yes, you heard that right. The cost. The party that's running the entire country, that controls a budget of hundreds of billions of pounds, that's spending money left, right and centre on various projects, is apparently too skint to afford a mayoral by-election. It's like saying you can't buy a sandwich because you just purchased a yacht. The logic doesn't just fail, it collapses in on itself like a black hole of absurdity. But wait, it gets better. They're also worried that Reform UK might win that hypothetical mayoral by-election. So let me get this straight. Labour is so terrified of reform that they're willing to undermine their own democratic processes, block popular candidates, and essentially rig the game to avoid the possibility of competition. If that doesn't scream confidence and strong leadership, I don't know what does. It's like a football team forfeiting the match because they're worried the other side might score. Absolutely pathetic. And then there's the delicious detail from the NEC source speaking to the Express like some Watergate informer, breathlessly reporting that even the most sceptical members were impressed by Starmer's leadership. Impressed? By what exactly? His ability to squash dissent? His skill at political manipulation? His talent for dressing up cowardice as strategy? Because from where I'm sitting, and I suspect from where most of the country is sitting, this looks less like impressive leadership and more like a scared man desperately trying to eliminate threats before they can challenge him. The source claims Starmer argued they couldn't risk a by-election in Greater Manchester and that the psychodrama from the last 48 hours hadn't been helpful. Psychodrama, that's what they're calling it. Not legitimate political discourse, not healthy debate within a party. Psychodrama, as if Burnham wanting to return to Parliament is somehow theatrical nonsense rather than a completely reasonable ambition for a career politician. The gaslighting is genuinely impressive in its shamelessness.
And here's a lovely little detail that speaks volumes. Whilst Starmer acknowledged that Burnham was a great mayor doing a great job, he barely mentioned him by name for the rest of his remarks. It's the political equivalent of saying "no offence, but" before saying something deeply offensive, or "I'm not racist, but" before saying something horrifically racist. The performative respect followed immediately by the brutal dismissal. It's almost Shakespearean in its duplicity. But now let's talk about Burnham's response, because this is where it gets really interesting. 5 hours of silence, 5 hours during which all of Westminster was watching, waiting, wondering what he'd say. Would he go nuclear? Would he rage against the machine? Would he storm out of the Labour Party in a blaze of principled fury? And then, finally, he spoke. And what did he say? He said he was disappointed and concerned. In the grand tradition of British understatement, the man who just had his political ambitions crushed by his own party leader said he was disappointed. It's magnificent. It's the verbal equivalent of being stabbed in the back and responding with, "I say, that's not cricket, old chap." But don't mistake politeness for weakness, because buried in that measured statement is some genuinely cutting criticism. He's concerned about the potential impact on important elections ahead. Translation, you've just handed Reform UK the biggest gift imaginable, you absolute muppets. He says to whoever becomes Labour's candidate, he'll have his full support. Translation, I'm the bigger person here, unlike certain prime ministers I could mention. He says tomorrow he returns with full focus to his role as mayor, defending everything they've built. Translation, I've got an actual job to do, unlike you lot playing Game of Thrones in Westminster whilst the country burns. And then comes the real kicker. I decided to put myself forward to prevent the divisive politics of reform from damaging that. We are stronger together, and let's stay that way. Absolutely brilliant. He's positioned himself as the unifier, the defender against reform, whilst simultaneously pointing out that Labour's decision to block him actually helps reform. He's made himself look magnanimous, principled, and focused on the bigger picture, whilst making Starmer and the NEC look petty, factional, and self-destructive. It's political judo of the highest order.
Because here's what's really happening beneath the polite British phrasing. Burnham is playing the long game. He knows that this decision makes Starmer look weak and scared. He knows that the backlash from Labour MPs and members is already building. He knows that when, not if, Labour loses Gorton and Denton to reform, everyone will remember who wanted to fight and who blocked him from fighting. He's positioning himself perfectly for the post-Starmer era, because mark my words, there will be a post-Starmer era, and it's coming sooner than anyone in number 10 wants to admit. And speaking of backlash, oh my goodness, the Labour MPs who went public are absolutely fuming. John McDonnell, the former Shadow Chancellor, didn't hold back one bit. Do not underestimate the depth of anger people will feel about this disgusting decision. Disgusting. Not unfortunate, not regrettable, disgusting. And then he goes for the jugular. If you think it strengthens you, I tell you it will simply hasten your demise. That's not criticism, that's a political death threat. MacDonald is essentially saying the clock is ticking on Starmer's premiership, and this decision just wound it forward by several months. Andy MacDonald, the Middlesbrough MP, called it completely outrageous and said it should be for members to decide who stands. You know, that quaint old concept called democracy that Labour used to pretend to care about. He called the NEC control freaks and said they've made a catastrophic mistake. Catastrophic, not just bad, not just wrong, catastrophic, the sort of mistake you don't recover from. And then Richard Burgon twisted the knife even further, saying Starmer and his clique are prepared to lose Gorton and Denton to reform just to protect narrow factional interests. Think about that accusation for a moment. Labour MPs are publicly stating that their own Prime Minister would rather hand a seat to Reform UK than allow internal party competition. That's not just damning, that's absolutely devastating. It's an accusation that Starmer cares more about his own position than the party's electoral success or the country's well-being. The phrase weak leadership keeps coming up, doesn't it? From multiple MPs, from different factions, all arriving at the same conclusion: weak leadership. Not strong and decisive, not strategic and clever, weak. Because that's what this is. Strength would be welcoming Burnham's candidacy, confident in your own position and abilities. Strength would be letting members decide and trusting the democratic process. This is weakness dressed up as procedure. This is fear masquerading as strategy. And let's be brutally honest about what message this sends to voters. It says that Labour doesn't trust its own members to make the right choice. It says that the leadership is so fragile, so insecure, that they can't tolerate even the possibility of internal competition. It says that the people running the country are more concerned about internal power games than actually serving the public. And voters aren't stupid. They can see what's happening. They can see a party eating itself from within whilst pretending everything's fine. The timing couldn't be worse either. We're weeks away from the Gorton and Denton by-election. Reform UK is already mobilising, already campaigning, already making this a test case for their ability to break into Labour heartlands. And what does Labour do? They create the most spectacular own goal imaginable. They generate a news cycle entirely about internal fighting, undemocratic processes, and weak leadership. They've handed reform the narrative on a silver platter. Look at Labour. They're so scared of us they won't even let their own candidates compete. They're cancelling democracy because they know they're finished. And here's the thing that should absolutely terrify Labour strategists. Burnham's polite, measured response makes him look even better. He's not throwing tantrums. He's not burning bridges. He's taking the high road whilst Starmer and his clique wallow in the mud. When this all inevitably falls apart, when Starmer's premiership collapses under the weight of its own incompetence and paranoia, guess who's going to be standing there looking prime ministerial? The man who stayed focused on his job, supported the party even when they stabbed him, and kept his dignity whilst others lost theirs.